Okay, we are being recorded. Last week, we went through finding and opening a photo, applying an effect on top of that photo, which doesn't change the photo. It's just a layer on top of the photo that you're looking through so that you see the effect on the photo, and then saving, exporting the result without affecting the original photo. Now the question is, what if you didn't want to apply the effect to the entire photo? What if you only wanted to apply that effect to a portion of the photo? What if you then wanted to apply a different effect to a different portion of the photo? That is masking, and it's key to maximizing the use of any good post-processing program. All right, so I am going to share the screen and start On1.
Oh, 1 second. I heard from she is not joining.
Okay. Thank you. All right, share the screen. Hit that, hit that. All right, hopefully everyone sees my On1 screen, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me go back to browse. All right, here we are at the starting point where we are going to choose our photos. Oh, before I get started, I just wanted to show you one thing that has nothing to do with masking. If you choose more than one photo, if I hold Shift, I can then choose these two photos. There are a number of additional modules that you can use within On1. I know Dave DeRocher at our Monday meeting was talking a lot about a separate program that he has called High Dynamic Range, HDR. Over here on the right-hand side, the HDR program is built right into On1. You don't need a separate program. This does everything that Dave was describing. If you have a bunch of photos that you want to create stitched together into a panorama, this button will help you do that. If you've taken a bunch of photos that have different focal points and you want to do focus stacking, this button here will do that. So there's virtually nothing that you need to do outside of On1. You can do all of it within On1 without having to purchase a separate program to do it. Okay, let's open up our first photo. All right, our first photo is a rose on a bed of leaves. Now I'm going to open up effects, and I am going to put a layer and effect on top of this photo. All right, and the layer I am going to do is I'll do color enhancer, and just so that everybody can see the effect, I am going to go overboard and make it ridiculously saturated. But this way, you can see the effect. But you can see the effect on the rose, and you can see the effect on all of the leaves behind it. When I turn it off, you can see the before, and when I turn it back on, you can see the after. Now, what if I wanted to do this saturation, this effect, only on the rose and not on the leaves? And that's where we get into masking. On the left-hand side, one of the icons says mask. So we click on mask, and that opens up a bunch of things here on the top of the screen. The first little icon here is a masking brush, where you would brush on or brush off things. All right, we'll ignore these other two for now. The next pull down is, am I going to paint out the effect or am I going to paint in the effect? The next one is the size of the masking brush. Now you can adjust the size of the masking brush by clicking this, and you can see the brush gets bigger or smaller. I don't like to do it that way because usually you want to resize the brush depending on where you are on the photo. You may recall that last week I mentioned the bracket keys, which are the two keys just to the right of the letter P on the keyboard. And if you hit the bracket keys, you can adjust the size of the brush while the brush is at the area where you're going to use it. So you got a much better idea of how large you want the brush to be. The next item on this bar here is the feather. And the feather is how soft the edge of the brush is. You can see there are two concentric circles on the brush. The middle is 100% of the effect, and as it goes out to the outer circle, it gets softer and softer until the brush, the effect, goes to 0. So that's the feather. And then finally, the opacity, which is how much of the effect is going to be applied in the dead center of that circle. And when you are masking, almost 100% of the time, you want the opacity to be 100%. So we're going to leave the opacity at 100%. Now, what we want to do is we want to paint away the effect, paint out the effect that we just laid on top of this entire photo. And so we make sure we have paint out. I will make this brush large, and I will hold down my mouse, and I will start to paint. And you can immediately see that everywhere that I am painting, that very vivid, saturated green is disappearing. And it's going back to the duller color that I started with. All right. If I now turn the color enhancer off, you can see that the rose is changing its saturation, but the leaves are no longer being affected because I just painted out the effect. The effect is no longer on the leaves. Is there a way to see what I have masked in and what I have masked out? Yes, there is. This little square right next to the on-off button is the masking window. And if I click on that, you can see a little bit better what the shape of the mask is. But if I go over to this view button, then I can really see what the mask is. There's the mask. You can see that the white area, which is where it allows the effect to show, is in the center. That's the rose. And I have painted out everything around it. I can even see where I didn't do a perfect job, and I can come up here with my painting out masking brush, and I can do that, and I can paint this out holding down my mouse, and I can paint that out. And now I've got not a perfect mask because it's not exactly the shape of the rose, but it's damn close. I turn off the view. And again, I turn off the effect, I turn on the effect, and it's very hard to see on the edges where the effect is ending on the leaves and where it's beginning on the rose because I chose a rather soft brush. And so the barrier between on and off is very soft and gradual.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
There's no way to show a side-by-side image, is there? Before and after?
Not that I am aware of. There might be, but I don't know the answer to that. I don't see any button on the bottom that gives you a before and after. But this button here on the side gives you a before and an after. All right. Okay. So that is applying the effect to the entire picture and then erasing the effect from those areas where I don't want it. What if your photo, when you want to apply an effect to the photo, you only want to apply the effect to a very small portion of the photo? Does it make sense to apply the effect to everything and then erase 95% of it? Isn't there a way to do exactly the opposite, which is erase the effect from everything and then just paint in where you want the effect to be? The answer is yes. So let me show you how to do that. I will reset everything. We are back to our original photo. I will now go back to our filter. I will select Color Enhancer. I will saturate the heck out of it. I will open up the masking screen. And you see that right now, view, nothing is masked. The effect is showing everywhere, because as you know, the effect is on the rows and it's on the leaves. What if I want to do the opposite, which is I've got the effect, but I want it to apply to nothing? This little button here, this invert button, does exactly that. If I click on invert, you'll notice that the screen has gone black, which means that the effect has been erased from everything. The effect is there, the layer is there, but the entire effect has been masked out. Now, I can come up to this toolbar up at the top, and instead of paint out, I am going to paint in. I am going to paint the effect into the photo. And if I come over to the rows where I want the saturation effect, hold down the mouse, and I start painting, I am now I am basically erasing the mask, and I am putting the effect back on the photo. So I've done the exact opposite. Instead of having the effect everywhere and then painting it out on the leaves, I've started with the effect nowhere, and I have painted it in on the rows. Having said that, if I take a look at the mask is exactly the same as it was when I did it the other way. The result is the same. The only question is, what do you feel more comfortable with? And is it easier to put the effect on everything and then erase the areas that you don't want it? Or is it easier to apply the effect to nothing and then just paint in the area where you want it to be? The result ought to be exactly the same.
Jay, honestly, I don't think it is the same.
Okay.
But anyway, that we could debate that. It seems to me that when you saturated it, the rose, the first way you did it, the rose was popping, it looked better. The rose looked better the first time you did it, because that's what we're focusing on, and it had really saturated the entire thing. And you didn't care as much about the leaves, so you could be a little wrong on the leaves, but I think you don't want to be as wrong on the rows. So I don't know. It's hard for me to verbalize that, but you probably would have to try.
I can go closer to the edge, and I can do that. And so the edges of the rows get saturated, but now I know I am touching a little bit of the leaves, but the softness of the brush will help to mitigate that effect. But the result, if you matched this and you matched it with the old one, you would see that they are identical and that rose saturation is identical. Whatever you're more comfortable doing, but the result is identical. Any other questions? Okay, I am going to show you another way to mask out the leaves, just leaving the saturation on the rose. So we'll go to reset.
Okay.
And yes.
How many different objects can you do in the photo and change what you're doing? In other words, can you create multiple effects layered on top of each other?
The answer is yes, and I'll be showing that in a little while. There's an unlimited number. All right, back to color enhancer. And we are going to saturate everything. And let's take a look at the masking screen. All right, right now, everything is saturated. And we're gonna go up to that toolbar again. And this time, instead of using the brush, which we've used for the last two techniques, I'm going to use this little brush here, which is called the Artificial Intelligence Quick Mask. If I click on this, you guys are gonna love this. If you have an object that has sharp edges or is distinctly different in luminosity or in color, where it's easy for the program to identify what it is and what it isn't, this artificial intelligence is absolutely brilliant. You start the artificial intelligence brush, and then when you click on the mouse, you can paint very quickly the area that you want to erase. Red is erase. Now, if I come down to the rose, I want to tell the program that I want to keep the rose. On a Windows program, you hold down the Alt button. On a Mac, I think you would hold down the Option button. And now when I paint, I am painting in green, which is telling the program, save this area. You don't have to be that precise, close enough. And now when I come up, I can hit apply, which will give me a preview of how well it did. I hit apply, and the red area is what it has now masked out, and the green area is now masked in. And in this particular case, since the rose has pretty sharp edges, it's done a damn near perfect job. I hit the done. And I am done. When I turn the effect off, on, the rose is saturated, none of the leaves are saturated. If I take a close look at the mask, I can see that the mask is a perfect outline of the rose. Questions? Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So you just showed us 3 different ways to do the same thing. Is that right?
That is correct. All right. We'll get into other things, but
I just want to make sure. Yes.
yes, we've done three ways of doing the same thing. All right. What if, now to answer Bruce's question, what if now we wanted to apply a different effect to the same mask? Do I have to recreate the mask? And the answer is no. Just like you can copy and paste photos or copy and paste lines in a Word document, you can copy and paste the mask. Over here in the masking section, you see the word copy. I can click on the word copy. And now, what do I want to do? Let's say what I want to do is change, I want to make the leaves darker, and I want to leave the rows alone. All right, I will open up a new filter, and that new filter is the tone enhancer. All right, the tone enhancer right now is covering the entire screen. And so you see, if I make it darker, it's affecting everything, but I don't want it to affect the rows. I open up the masking section, and now here's the word paste. And when I click on the word paste, you can see over here, I now have the exact same mask that I had when I was doing the coloring. Now, as I said, I didn't want to make the rows darker. I wanted to make the leaves darker. How can I make the leaves darker and leave the rows alone? Anyone?
Invert?
Yes, the invert button will do exactly that. If I click on invert, look what's happened to the mask. It is now erasing the effect from the rows, and it's applying the effect only to the leaves. Same mask, I've just inverted it. Now, when I make the change to the brightness, it's not affecting the rows at all. It's only affecting the leaves. And I make the leaves darker, and I'm good. What if I want to add another effect just to the leaves? Well, I'm happy with this mask, so I will click on copy. Let's say I want to make the leaves a little blurrier. I will click on add filter. I click on blur. Now again, the blur is on everything. Well, I don't want the blur on everything. I only want the blur. Who's talking?
I'm sorry. I was looking for the invert. Never mind. But
you want to mute yourself? Thank you. So now the blur is on everything. If I paste the mask, now the blur is only on the leaves. Now in this particular case, you could see there's a little bit of a halo outline, but as I showed you last week, you can change how intense the effect is by changing the opacity. So on the blur, I can reduce the opacity a little bit, which sort of gets rid of that halo, but still gives the leaves some blur. All right, so what have we done here? We've masked out the leaves and we've applied the saturation to the rows. And then we have masked out the rows and we have applied a darkness filter to the leaves. And then we've continued to mask out the rows and we've applied a blur to the leaves. Let's take a look. Here's the original photo. And now here's all of our effects, one layer on top of another, including all of the masks. Any questions? Okay, now we are going to go to a different type of masking. So let me reset. I'm going to go back up to my browse and I'm going to select a different photo. This is a photo of Megan's Bay. What if what I want to do here is I want to make the sand lighter, I want to make the sky bluer, and I want to make the hills a little lighter, but I don't want to affect the water in between at all. Well, this is clearly a job for masking. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select and effect. And the effect I'm going to do is tone enhancing. And the tone enhancing will allow me to brighten the sand. Well, you can see right now, since I haven't done any masking, any brightening that I do is going to brighten everything. That's okay, because I'm going to mask out everything that I don't want to be affected. So I am just looking at the sand and I say, all right, that's how bright. I want it to be really bright. I'm doing it really bright just so that you see the effect more clearly. Without the effect and with the effect. Now, what I can do is I can take my masking brush and I could brush away the mask, brush away the effect, paint out the effect from everything. There is an easier way when you have horizons, when you have straight lines. And that's this little guy here, which is called the masking bug. I click on that and it gives me a different set of selections on my pull down. And basically this says I can select everything below the line has the effect in, and everything above the line has the effect masked. Everything above the line is the effect, everything below the line is masked. Everything to the left is masked, everything to the right is the effect, and everything to... Let me select linear top, which has black on the top, white on the bottom, which means it's going to allow the effect to come through below the line. I come on down, I see this little icon here, and I want it right on the sand. You can see this is the effect. This section here is the feather. So this is a very wide, gradual change from very bright to masked out completely, so there's no brightness at all. And you can change the feather just by dragging it. In this particular case, I want it to be a very small feather because I want to affect the sand, but I don't want it to be on the water. Now I can move this. You see, as I move it, you can see that everything below the line has got the effect, and everything above the line doesn't have the effect. I can rotate the effect. So you see everything below the line has the effect, everything above the line doesn't have the effect. I'm going to bring this up to the sand, and I am going to align this with the sand, and I am happy, and I am done. Now, I am going to want to make the sky bluer. So I add another effect. I'm going to color enhance. And this time, I'm going to come down to my blues, and I'm going to saturate the heck out of my blues. All right, so now I have made the sky the color that I wanted, but you can see it's affecting this section here, and that's no good. What do? I come up to my masking bug, and this time I'm doing linear bottom, where it's going to mask out anything that's below the line. So now I've made the sky blue, but it has affected nothing below the line. Any questions? So now I've got two effects stacked on top of each other with two completely different masks. One that's allowing the brightness to be on the sand, one that's allowing the blue to be in the sky. All right, well, yes.
Now the AI tool, you could have used it as well to pick out the sand and pick out the sky, right?
Yes, I could have. Correct. Correct. Now, if, let's say, following on Bruce's question, you had used the AI tool and it wasn't precise. It had included a little bit of the water Is there a way to correct that? Well, the answer to that is yes, because you can always go into the view and see where the mask is, and then come up here to your paintbrush and click on Paint Out, and any error below the line you could have erased. So you can combine tools. You can start with the AI tool, or you can start with the masking bug, and then you can switch over to the brush and make any correction that you want so that the final mask that you have for that particular effect is exactly where you want it and exactly where you don't want it. All right?
Jay, but when you looked at the mask, you really didn't know what it was masking. You could only guess that it was covering the right spot.
All right, I will show you another little trick now that you bring it up. It is possible, in addition to having this view being this stark black and white, which makes it easier to see where there's errors where you can paint in. Up on the top bar here, you can see the word mask. And if I click on the word mask, I come down to view mode. And right now, the view mode is grayscale. But if I click on red overlay and I click on view, I see exactly where the mask is, and I see the picture underneath it. Does that answer your question, Debbie?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. There's always a way to do it. Okay, mask, back to grayscale. All right, now we turn that view off. Okay, now, how do we select? We are going to want to brighten up those hills. I don't want to brighten anything else. Now remember when we were talking about brushing effects, we said, well, it doesn't make sense to have the effect applied to everything if you only want it applied to a few things. So that's the approach that we're going to take. We're going to say add filter. We're going to do tone enhancer. And this time we are going to brighten everything up, but we only want to brighten up the hills. All right, so we're going to start by doing the inverse. We're going to say I am applying it to nothing, and now I will only paint in on the hills. So I go to paint in. Now here's a little bit of a challenge. The hills aren't very big. How do you prevent the effect from spilling over into the sky or spilling over into the water? There's another little button up here, this little guy here, which is called the perfect brush. And what the perfect brush does is it helps you to avoid spilling over sharp edges. So now if I come into this area, as long as the center of that circle is on the green area, it knows that the blue sky and the blue water is not green. And now when I paint, it is going to avoid doing anything to the blue sky or the blue water. And now I come over to this end and I do exactly the same thing. And I come all the way to the edge and all the way back here. Let's take a look at what, let me just click on that little guy there. Whoop, that was wrong. So I can just do undo and I can just click on that. Let's take a look at the mask. Pretty good. Now, the perfect brush is differentiating between anything that's on that hill that's not green. Now, we didn't want that. We want everything on the hill to be masked. So at this point, I will turn off that perfect brush. I will make my brush smaller. And now as I said, I can combine tools. And now I will just carefully paint in some of those little black dots and over here and paint in, and I will paint over those little black areas. Come down here a little smaller. And now I've got a mask that I am very happy with. And now if I want to make any adjustment, I can make any adjustment, and I am only adjusting the hills. So what we have done is we have taken a photo. Let's take a look at the original. Here's the original photo. And so we have made the sand brighter. We have made the sky bluer. We have made the hills a little lighter, and we have not affected the water at all. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. What are you using to do the painting actually on your computer? Are you using the little, I don't have the terminology, the little square that you put your, oh, you're using a desktop.
I'm using a mouse on my desktop. Now you can also plug in a mouse onto a laptop. You don't have to use that little square. That little square is very difficult to use for painting.
That's what I was just thinking. Okay, good.
But a mouse is a beautiful thing to use. Some people have drawing tablets. What are they? Wacom tablets. And you can get very accurate painting using those. So there's any number of tools that you can use. But you're right, that little square on the laptop is not very precise. Any other questions on these types of masking techniques? All right, I have two more to show you. Let's go to Reset All. And we're going to go back to our photos. And I am going to choose this flower. Now, this flower looks very similar to the rose photo that I had in the first photo. But what if I wanted to apply, say, the saturation, not only to the center rose, but to all, it's the center flower, but to all of the flowers in the photo, including the ones that are in the background and that are blurry. That would be a very difficult masking job if it wasn't for a couple of other tools that are available. All right. So let's go to Effects. We will add our color enhancer. We will go to Saturation. We will blow out everything. So now everything is saturated, including the green leaves, the brown ground, everything that we don't want saturated. How can we just limit the saturation to all of the yellow flowers? And the way we can do that is we select the masking section. And there's a little button here that says color range. If I click on that color range and I come over to this little eyedropper, and I drag, I click on the eyedropper and I come over to what color I want to mask in. I can click on that yellow. Let's take a look at what mask it created by clicking on View. It has painted out, it has masked out everything that is not close to that color yellow. Can I get even more precise? I can. There's a little slide on the right-hand side here that says color range. And if I adjust the color range, it says I'm going to be increasingly picky about the color that is close to the one that you chose. So as a result, I am getting less and less of that concrete in the upper right-hand corner and less of other things that are in that photo. So I can make this color range as specific as I want. So if I come down to here, and now let's go out of view. Now, when I click on Color Enhancer, off and on, I can see that the yellow flower is now saturated, but the green leaves aren't touched at all because now, because of the color selection, I have masked by color and the leaves are not yellow. What if, in addition to the yellow part of the flower, I also wanted to saturate the red part of the flower? Well, remember, you can combine masks. So I can come back into view. I am going to select the size of my brush. I am in Mask Brush, Paint In, and I am going to paint back in the section that wasn't yellow, but I still want it to show up as saturated in the photo. There's red in this flower. There's red in the center of that flower. There's red in the center of that flower. And if I make the brush small, there was red in the center of that flower. Now, if I look at view, the red is as saturated as the yellow. Off, on, off, on. So now I have been able to mask multiple things that had something in common. They were all yellow, and I masked on the basis of color as opposed to shape. Any questions? Okay, if there's no questions, I will reset all and I will show you one other masking tool. By the way, there are other masking tools. There are dozens, but these are the primary ones that you'll find yourself using. Right? Again, we're going to start with this flower, and I am going to add the amount of saturation. Bang. What if you have a photo that has large differences between bright areas and dark areas? This is not the best example of that, but I'll use this as the example. Black and white photos, this would apply to. But there's also photos where there are things that are in the sunlight that you want to tone down, things that are in the shadows that you want to bring out. So there are differences in luminosity between different things in the photo. And you might want to mask it based upon how bright things are. In order to do that type of mask, over here, there's a button that says Lumen. And if I click on Lumen, it's going to automatically do a mask based upon differences in brightness. If I take a look at the view, I don't have stark black and white areas. That's because I have a lot of intermediate brightness. But the flowers are the most bright things in this photo. Is there a way that I can isolate just the brightest things in this photo? And the answer to that is yes. I can use these tools that I am circling on the right-hand side in order to change what is my definition of what is bright and what is dark. I can mask out the things that are not as bright by sliding this lever up. You can see I am eliminating everything that is not really bright. Can I make the bright things look brighter and differentiate them from the things that are dark? I can slide this guy down. You see how bright the flowers are getting. As a result, I have a mask now that is just showing the bright things in the photo. The bright flowers, but also the bright concrete. This is not a problem because I can paint out the concrete. Remember, I can combine masks. And so I can paint out the concrete that is very bright. Now, really, all that I'm left with is bright flowers or bright whatever. If I turn the view off, here's my photo, and you can see that the flowers are saturated. If I turn the saturation off, the yellow goes back to its original, and if I click on, it goes back to it being saturated. Again, if I want the red, which was not a bright color, if I want to include it, I come up to the top, I can paint in, and I am going to brush in the red that was excluded from that mask. And now I have the entire flower, or whatever it is that you're trying to mask, back in full saturation. All right, I turn view off, and now you can see that the red is also fully saturated along with the yellow flowers. All right, so we've covered at least 4 different ways, 5 different ways. We've masked with brushes, we have masked with artificial intelligence, we have masked with masking bugs, we have masked by color, and we have masked by brightness, by luminosity. Those are the 5 main ways of masking individual items in your photo so that you can adjust any one particular area or any one particular item in any photo that you bring into On1. Questions? All right, if there's no questions, I will stop sharing On1. Let me first reset everything so I'm back there. I will stop sharing, and we're back to here. And I can unmute. Okay.
Very clearly explained, Jay. Excellent clarity in the explanation. Thank you.
All right. Here's your chance for any other questions about what I just showed you.
That was a terrific job, Jay. You're an excellent teacher. And I think this format of teaching with a small group, it's so superior to me to doing it in the meeting rooms. I don't know. It's really a great tool. And whoever created these programs, I don't know what kind of brains they have, but it's amazing.
Okay, well, let me stop the recording because you